So many things have hinges. My workshop is full of them. This is my cut-off saw. Or then they're the hinge linkages in my scroll saw. Even my stepladder is hinged. This is the biggest hinge in my workshop on my metal folder. Inside the house, it's not just doors and windows that have hinges. And of course, even the tripod I'm filming with has a hinge. So this video is about my experience of using hinges, particularly in my arcade machines. So it's not exactly typical. I'm not a hinge expert. I always have to say that at the beginning of these videos, but I have used a lot of them in the 40 years or so I've been out in this workshop. If you want to skip to a particular chapter, here are the contents. So I'm going to start with an ordinary door hinge and its smaller cousin, the cupboard hinge. These are relatively simple things which you rebaited into the frame and the door to make sure they fit tight without any gaps. There are lots of videos online of YouTube videos of experts doing this, and they make it look wonderfully easy. But I decided to demonstrate it because I don't do this very often, and I thought perhaps it would reveal some of the problems more clearly than, because the experts make it look so easy. So first of all, you have to go around the edge of the shape. And the most important thing really of all is to have a nice sharp chisel, or spend some time sharpening one before starting. Go slightly inside the line, because it's bound to be a bit outside the hinge. So once you've gone all round the outside of the hinge, then you just have to do multiple cuts, and really I should have had a slightly wider chisel for this, so it's going to take a bit of time. Well, not very even. So the next stage is to try and get rid of them. You can do quite a bit just by scraping across the top. And trying to get the cut, the depth that's the same thickness as the hinge metal, as the metal of the hinge. I shouldn't think that's quite deep enough yet. There's a bit of a hump in the middle. But that isn't far off. So the next thing is to put the screws in, and it's important the screws are in the middle. So I could dot punch them, or more sophisticated, you can get these nice little centering drills. So if I put it in my drill, they kind of do the work automatically. So now the screws should go in the middle. These screws are a bit small actually, but anyway, this is just a demonstration. You might think that looks perfectly straightforward, and I suppose in a way it is, but you see I haven't done it that well. There's a gap there, and I think if you look really carefully you can see that it's slightly closer in on that end than it is there. And of course all this is a lot more difficult if you're trying to do it on a door frame that's already in situ. So I'll just do the other side and then we can see how well the door fits together. Well, actually that turned out a bit better than I expected. It's not perfect though. I didn't get them completely in line. You can see over the end of the length they come a bit apart, but certainly by my standards not too bad. I think the other, besides using a really sharp chisel, the other thing I would say is always practice on a bit of scrap before cutting into your door frame. So using conventional hinges in wood is quite a faff, and I don't use them like that on my machines much. The one place where I do find conventional hinges very useful is for making prototypes, and then I don't attach them to wood, they're just welded to steel frames. I don't usually keep my prototypes, but this one for the divorce machine took root in the garden, and here are a couple of the hinges welded in place. So I thought I'd just talk a bit about making prototypes. They often start off as little strips of card, and I just pin them together with drawing pins. So if I put two together like that, they make quite a good hinge by itself, much simpler hinge. They stay together quite well, and I can test reasonably complicated linkages to see if the general idea is right. But of course there's lots. This isn't enough by itself. I would need to know how the motor would cope with the loads, how rigid it is, and all sorts of other things. So the next thing is I would make a 3D version out of metal, and this is where the hinges come in. So now I've cut some bits of metal and I'm just going to weld the hinges on. For small things I use these 1-inch hinges, but more often I use slightly bigger ones, 2-inch hinges, as they're a little bit stiffer from side to side motion. Now I have my version in metal that does just about the same thing. It took about another 5 minutes or so to tack weld it to the motor and put a link in. I haven't tried it out yet, so this will be interesting. Connect it up, and I don't know, it may jam or want to destroy itself, I'm not sure. No, not at all, it's perfectly happy. So I haven't got any particular use for this mechanism, but really you could make a linkage like this in half an hour or so. So that's why I like ordinary hinges. And then you can reuse them too. It only takes another 10 minutes to grind off all the hinges, ready for another prototype. Also of course to move them if it doesn't work or it's not the movement you want. For the doors to get at the control panels and other parts of my arcade machines, I tend to use continuous piano hinge rather than ordinary separate hinges. The thing is that piano hinge is actually very, very thin because the load is spread throughout the whole length of the thing. So there's actually usually no need to rebate anything. I just mount them flush and it looks fine. So I thought I'd make one up just to show how I use them and why I like them. So I'll probably fix it to the door first, and yes, I'll center punch them. This is an atomic dot punch, automatic dot punch. I like to drill pilot holes, particularly in the ply, and then put the screws in. I should have said you have to be careful about the screws, that they don't, that they lie flush with the edge of the hinge. Otherwise, it won't be able to close completely, and then the whole door won't close properly. I tried to just do one or two to start with. It's obviously easier on a long length than on this short one. Because then if you get it wrong the first time, it gives you, you can then kind of adjust it by loosening the screws and putting the new ones in slightly separate places. Okay, so that's going to go in there. Now to do the frame, I'll get it like that. Yeah, this is always a little bit tricky. Oops. Now, even with just one screw in, I think I'll be able to see. Yeah, not bad. But I can continue to make a few adjustments as I put more screws in. So there's my finished door without any rebating. Well, I did quite well with this door, but flush fitting doors are never really easy. They're always a bit fiddly because you can see the gap round the edge, and even if it's like 0.5 mil off, your eye can pick up the slight variation. 30 years ago or so, I built our own kitchen cupboards, and you can see with flush fitting doors, you can see they're all over the place now. It doesn't bother me, but if it does, there's a much simpler solution. The idea is that instead of fitting the door flush, you fit the door on front of the frame, called face fitting, and then slight imperfections just won't show up at all. Of course, this is how kitchen cabinets are fitted these days. So you have, that's the door, and it opens cleverly like that with these ingenious special kitchen cabinet hinges. They have lots of different screws which will adjust for adjust them up and down, in and out, or sometimes twisty as well. Amazing things. You have to drill a large hole first and be careful not to go all the way through to take this recessed bit of the hinge. It's always a 35 mil hole. Then you screw that bit in. Then you mount this separately on the frame. It's great if you're doing it all the time to use these hinges, but I don't use them much. If you're unfamiliar with them, they're a bit of a fiddle. And of course, like other hinges, this is much easier to do flat on the bench. If you're struggling under a kitchen cupboard, it's all a lot harder work. So now we can assemble it. They just clip together, these two bits, and with any luck, I don't know, will this work? Well, that's not too bad. But the main reason I don't use these kitchen hinges is because there's a simpler hinge that I prefer. It's just a thing called a cranked hinge. No complicated screws and holes to drill. You just screw it into the face of the wood. I haven't done that very neatly, actually. I wasn't really paying attention, but it doesn't look too bad. And a lot quicker and more surefire than playing around with the flush fitting door. I make quite a lot of my own hinges for my machines. On the outsides, many of them have glass doors and glass panels, and I make the hinges for these using stainless steel. Stainless steel is a bit tricky. I think a lot of it is because it doesn't conduct heat well, so it doesn't conduct the heat away from the cut, and tools and drill bits tend to overheat, and that also work hardens the stainless, so it makes it even harder and difficult to work with. So for hinges, it's difficult drilling out the hinge pin in stainless steel. My solution was, some time ago I bought an expensive length of thick wall stainless tube. This one's about 13.5 mil outside diameter and 7.5 mil internal, and I've just used this ever since for all the pin hinges. I still have to drill them out a bit to 8.5, but it's not quite such a mammoth task. So then, once I've got my hinge barrel, if you like. All I have to do is to weld it to the plates that are going to fix to the glass. I could do this with my MIG welder, but then I'd have to change the reel over. So actually I find it usually do it with the TIG welder. Slightly more fiddly. I'm putting these weights to stop them moving around when I tack it. Well, I'm a bit embarrassed by my welding. I made a real pig's ear of it, but they'll be strong enough. So then there's two halves of the hinge, and I generally just use a bit of studding as the pin to go through the hinge. You can Loctite the nut on one end, and I leave the other one usually just free, so it'll work perfectly well as a hinge, but it has the advantage that you can pull it out, so you can take a glass door off completely rather than just having it hinging open to get at things better. Of course, the final thing is that I would drill holes in the right places to go into the glass. I prefer not to have the holes in glass too close to the edge, so I don't know, so maybe 35mm in from the edge. When the alien grows, its eyes will peer over the top and its tentacles come out the sides and more out the bottom, and then finally the big tentacle comes round and pokes you in the bottom. Bobby, Bobby, help me! I usually make my own hinges for the mechanisms inside the machines too, so I might start off with a bit of 25mm bar, drill that out on the lathe, and then drop in a couple of bearings. I'm sorry if you don't have a lathe, all this is a bit academic, but a lathe is very useful for things to do with hinges. You don't need to use ball races unless you want it to be really friction free. In fact, just bushes or just running on steel is fine. And these are going to be the edge pieces. There you go. So I'm going to hinge this bit to this long bit. So I've made that barrel a little bit too wide, so I've got a couple of spacers in there. So I'll clamp that up. Yep. And now I can weld it all up. I'll go back to using my MIG welder this time, I think. Well, of course I could go on and weld this fully, but you can see it works perfectly well as a hinge, and has a lot of strength in there. That could easily take my weight. So making your own hinges isn't difficult, and it's often a better alternative. The other thing about the hinges for my machines is deciding exactly where to put them. This may sound trivial, but it does get surprisingly complicated. So I'm going to illustrate how I do it with bits of card. So this is, I'm going to pretend this is a door. This is the door frame, and I want my door in this case to hinge all the way around and end up back there. So it's starting here and going all the way around to there. So I've got to find where the hinge is going to be. So how a simplest way to do it is with a pair of protractors, and draw a couple of arcs from the middle of the end of the door. And then you just have to draw a line that goes through the intersection of the two arcs. It's a classic bit of geometry. I do like geometry. Now, if you think about it, the hinge has got to be somewhere along this line. It's always got to be the same distance from there as it has from there. So the next thing I use is an angled protractor, and so I can measure the angle from where the door starts off to where it ends up. So it's got to go all the way around there. But actually all you have to do to find the position for the hinge pin, I'm going to put a couple of panel pins in here. Just make it a little clearer. Now you just swivel the hinge around until it coincides with the line. And this, believe it or not, is the hinge point. So just to prove that it works, I'm going to put my pin through here. Let's put a bit of sellotape on the hinge, and now with any luck yeah, very satisfying. Of course I don't usually do this with doors, but it's for one mechanism or another where I know where it's starting off from, and then I know where it's ending up. It's usually where it's hidden away somewhere and how it pops out. The difference is between big hinges and small hinges. So that's a full-size door hinge, and that's a little doll's house hinge. They're pretty similar, but there is one difference. It's quite common for bigger brass hinges to have steel washers between the leaves because the steel wears less quickly than the brass with the whole weight of the door. Hinges for big things like this gate put an enormous load on the post. It's important to think what you're attaching it to. To the gate, which goes quite a long way this way, and then if someone climbs over at this end, there's enormous load tipping it over. Wheels and rollers can be useful to take the strain off hinges and door frames. It's useful for these big doors in my old shed. The biggest hinge I've ever seen is on Rotterdam's flood barrier. I think this also has wheels or rollers underwater along the length of the actual barrier. The scale is just ridiculous. At the other end of the spectrum, the very tiniest hinges are etched out of silicon. Too small to be seen with the naked eye, these micro electromechanical devices are called MEMS. They're actually MEMS accelerometers and microphones inside almost every mobile phone. This is a model of a MEMS sensor inside a video projector. They have these tiny little mirrors. In the actual projector, this would be less than the width of a human hair. And each mirror is hinged on a tiny, thin, springy bit of silicon, and it's attracted by electrostatic forces that tilt the mirror by 15 degrees. So there's one for each pixel in a projector. So an HD projector has 2 million of these inside a chip, about 2 million. And how it works is that you have to imagine here that you're inside the projector and this is the back of the lens. Normally the light would be deflected from the light source away from the lens, but when the electrostatic charge is applied, then it reflects the light out the front of the lens. And in a way it's even more amazing because there are often 3 of these chips inside a projector, one for a magenta light source, one for a cyan light source and one for a yellow light source. And to get them all aligned so perfectly as they come out of the projector, astonishing really. Well, of course I don't use hinges quite as small as that, but I do use some really quite small ones. I don't get on with these little doll's house ones. They're so feeble, the metal is so thin and the screws are so fiddly. I prefer ones you get for model planes, radio controlled model planes. These go on the wings to control the wing surfaces, to hinge the wing surfaces, and they have quite a lot of strength. So for an elbow joint, instead of using a more traditional hinge, I very likely just stuff one of those in, and I think it looks neat too. I quite like the look of it. I suppose with these tiny hinges I'm always improvising and everyone looks different. I just came across this one in a drawer. This is a bit of an old olive oil can with a very thin brass tube and a bit of piano wire. It makes a very free hinge. I can't remember what I was doing with it now. They're soldered together, which is why it's gone a bit corroded and a bit messy.
You are now 60 years old and not much time left.
One hinge I particularly like is this one I used on the little man in the housing ladder. He's made of this plastic called Tufnol. It's a very rigid plastic that's used for gears amongst other things. It's got layers of cloth embedded in it. You can sand it quite easily and then you can sort of see the different layers that become apparent. Anyway, to make the hinges I just use a masonry nail. So in the arm, the limb that's going to move, I would drill a slightly oversized hole, and in the body, or the bit that isn't moving, I would drill a slightly undersized hole, and then just hammer it in. I just have to hammer it all the way through to make this work, so I'll just do it on a block. I don't want it to go too far. That's about right. So this is a very nice freely moving hinge, and it's extraordinarily hard wearing. That little man's climbed up the housing ladder over 55,000 times, and they really haven't worn at all, the plastic. And of course the masonry nail is very hard, so steel, so that's also very good. So that's a good hinge. with quite a lot of situations with these tiny hinges, I want them to be as narrow as possible. Most hinges have a bit of width in this direction to give them some sort of stiffness, to keep them just moving in a single plane. You can make the simplest way to make a thin hinge, just hinging, say, these two strips of steel, is to put a bolt through with a washer in between, another washer, and then a nut. Well, you could just use an ordinary nut and Loctite, although this time I've used a nylock. I often do, because then it's a bit easier to take them to bits if you need to. Do it up till it's tight, undo it a little bit, and then you've got a hinge it's not too bad. Other alternatives, if you want thinness in that dimension, I like these, where are they? That's the thing you buy for a model plane, called a clevis, and that's just two springy bits of metal, and so you can spring them apart. You spring them apart, there we go, and then get this over to the hole, and then you've got a much thinner hinge than that. Obviously wouldn't take the same load. You can get slightly more better made clevises, and then you can put a bolt through, same sort of idea, to make them carry a bit better load. Or if you really want something stronger, you can make your own. If you've got a milling machine, I find making these rather satisfying. You can make them as strong as you like. My little wooden figures, when I want the limbs to move, this is a hinge that I particularly like. I don't know if it's my own invention, I doubt it. I should think other people have discovered it too. So I'm going to show you how I make this one. It's quick to make, so really it's just a matter of making 6 holes. So then we dot punch them. I guess I should have said the metal I'm using, it's about 1mm thick and about 6mm wide. So the next thing is to drill the holes, 2.5mm holes. Now I'm going to thread the other two with a 3mm tap. Let's put some glue on it. Tapping compound. I tap things in my drill press. It's a bit unconventional, it seems to work right. So now I've got to cut them in two. And the last thing, I've got some 3mm studding. We fit one on the studding, screwing it in. Now we get the second one on. We don't want to get that too far on, just so that the thread just comes to the edge of it, like that. This is where I use the some high strength Loctite. And I'm going to lock this one on the end and then just work it into the thread. So the Loctite's set now. So now I can just wind them until they go solid, then wind this one back a little bit, and then I've just got to cut it off. Yeah, that's a bit of a mess, so now I'd probably sand that back down a bit. So here is the finished hinge. So here's a little figure I made with this sort of hinge. I think she's the school SWAT. She puts her arm up with the answers to all the questions. Of course I would fix this to a motor or something to make it work. Yeah, I should have said it's not as neat as it could have been because the arm is so thin. I had to cut off the end of the screw. I should have used a much thinner screw. You can get some wonderful ones again for radio controlled planes, but then I can of course easily remove the arm. It just unscrews. I thought I'd end with the very smallest hinge that I use, and this is for stop motion animation. Years ago I worked with an animator, and all the little joints in the figures were just stuck with tiny blobs of blue tack, and it was an absolute nightmare getting them to stay in place. And for every frame you had to put a glass sheet down on the artwork before clicking the camera. You couldn't do more than about one frame a minute. So over the years I've tried all sorts of different things, and this is the one that I like the best. So this is actually just a bit of silhouette animation. So this character, I'm just going to hinge his legs to his body first. So I'll just put mark the hole, the position for the hinge. Go through all layers. Now what I use for the hinge are these funny old things called gimp pins. I found these on eBay. I don't know if they're made anymore, but anyway, they just seem to suit this very well. Through one leg, through two legs, and now through the body. And there's my black hinge. It doesn't show, well, it shows up all right, better at an angle. So then what I do is I cut them off just above, maybe 1 or 2 millimeters above. They cut really easily. But this is the thing that surprised me and works very well, is I put it on a block of metal now, and then I just very lightly rivet it over. So what's happening, this is belling out the end of the gimp pin to make it more difficult for the legs to fall off, if you like. It does look a little bit shiny, so then I usually go over it with a black felt tip, or even better, to paint it matte black. So I'll just do the same for the other joints. There's the finished hinged man. Now put a couple of bits of flexible magnetic tape on, well, perhaps just one bit actually might do, on his body. Then to actually film the animation, you start off with a steel sheet and then you put the background on the steel sheet, and then you lay your character down. Now the magnet just keeps him just roughly in position. The thing is that he's just a joy to move. It's very quick, and I can make him do all sorts of things. And part of the fun is experimenting with what he can do with these figures when you've made them. I use After Effects a lot, but it's not quite the same flexibility, being able to play and experiment with the characters that you've created, I find. Then I've got my still camera up here, and so I just move him a tiny bit at a time and then take a photo with the remote control. Oh, no, it just went off. Oh, no, it's all right. So anyway, that's the end of this video about hinges. I hope you found something useful. I thought I'd leave you with the last complete bit of animation I did using this method, which is the animation that plays at the end of the housing ladder if you manage to win the house in your lifetime.
Congratulations! The house is yours!
Hooray!
Oh, well done!
Wonderful!
Really, really good! Well done!
Oh, you got it!
Brilliantly! Really deserve it!